If Social Security were to end tomorrow, the group of Americans that would be hit hardest and hit worst would be young people. They would see the biggest economic impact from no longer having Social Security, even though they're not directly receiving benefits. That's because if the federal government, that currently spends about $1 trillion to retired Americans to keep them economically independent and sustainable, if they were to just turn that spigot off, it would be on families, namely their children and their grandchildren, to make up the difference. Nobody is expecting, if Social Security were to go away, that a bunch of 80-year-olds or 85-year-olds or 90-year-olds would finally lift themselves up by the bootstraps and go get a job to support themselves. They don't have an easy way of increasing their income. So if you decrease their income from Social Security, it'll be on families to make up the difference. I posted this in a video a couple days ago, and I have, basically a let me tell you what PhD economists talk about economic research answer that I will get to. But I just have to first say, in that video, one of the comments I got was from, basically of the vein, well, you don't have to support your parents. It's their fault if they didn't save for retirement, and so you shouldn't have to support them. That's not the right conclusion. And one of them came from a financial planner. Like, it's their fault if they didn't save for retirement. So it children won't be affected, young people won't be affected. They just cut off their family members that aren't able to support themselves. So I thought this was such a brilliant articulation of why we need Social Security. I've been educating on Social Security for almost 20 years, and I'm like, man, this guy nailed it. There are two options here. Option one, we all make a compact across generations, across workers, across families, that nobody is going to be economically destitute when they're old. And we're all going to pitch in to make sure that's the case, and then we all benefit from it in myriad ways. That's option one. It's called Social Security. Option two, it's every man for himself, including the elderly. And if it just turns out that your grandma made some poor decisions in her late 40s, that she emptied a 401k when she maybe shouldn't have, and then it ends up that she's not able to afford independent living, well, you kick her on the sidewalk where she belongs. And don't you dare help her, because that is her fault, not yours. And that is the answer. No, no, no. You won't be responsible for elderly people in your family. You just cut them off. So we don't need, ergo, we don't need Social Security. So that's the solution, everyone. You won't have to support your grandparents if there's no Social Security. You just cut them out of your lives for good. Done and done. Okay, economics research. Let's be serious. Back to the economics research. Why do I think that if Social Security were to end, families would then bear the financial and economic cost of supporting their elderly members? Well, that's because basically the totality of economic research that looks at the financial and economic linkages between family, indicate that that's the case. Because Social Security has existed for almost a century and is very, very good at its job, we don't have a ton of evidence of how much it would affect families. What we have is basically evidence of linkages in almost every other scenario. So the year you get married, the year that you get divorced, the year that you have a kid, if you have a major illness, if your spouse or your child has a major illness, in any one of these situations in which there's some kind of shock to a family, people get more help from their family members. They get help from their parents, they get help from their siblings, or they get help from their children, kind of depending on where they are in life. The financial linkages between families is very, very strong. In my own research, I've written about this in regards to unemployment, and I've shown that in the year that someone loses a job, they are much more likely to get direct cash assistance from family. Even if they're 55 years old, they still get money from their parents when they lose their job, because families help out, members in trouble. Kind of the takeaway from this would be, if there were not money going to elderly family members from Social Security, that money would have to come from families. And there was a study basically in like the late 70s that tried to use early survey data to find basically what the family replacement rate would be. But what they were focused on was just how much more money parents could spend on their own children for education and college now that they didn't have to take care of their parents because of Social Security. So there's limited look at just the elderly, because they've basically been off the table for almost 100 years. But we know that families help each other out financially. And in fact, the question in economics is what is trying to determine what motivates them to do so, whether families do this because they're altruistically motivated to help each other, or they see it as like a risk sharing finance mechanism. And believe it or not, all of this evidence comes from testing whether or not families are economically linked in order to provide a common insurance coverage versus they just love each other. And there are economists who have like won Nobel Prizes trying to prove whether or not people send money because they love each other. And that's the goofy profession I come from. But they have raked up a mountain of evidence showing that families would absolutely be on the hook. And you know, it might be that you don't have a good relationship with your family members and that this doesn't apply to you. Things don't have to be true. Things don't have to apply to you to be true in the economy, right? Because we have a massive economy. We have 300 plus million people in the US. And on average, we know that people would help their elder family members. So that is why the greatest economic impact of ending Social Security will be on young people who then have to live their basically entire economic adulthood with just like an exponentially higher risk and responsibility than young people that came before. And it would alter the economic choices and investments that they get to make. So, you know, if Congress talks about ending Social Security, you have to know that if you're 22, you have the most to lose. I mean, the absolute most to lose.